first phase of retention is recruiting. And in my research for this and in my experience that I've had talking to contractors, I would argue that this is the most important phase in retention, which may sound crazy, because you haven't even done an interview, you haven't even hired this person or made a job offer yet. But recruiting, in my opinion, is the most crucial piece of retaining good employees. So let's get into some of that. Why is it so important to be recruiting and recruiting really well? First off, you want to find the right people. You need to make sure that you're getting your job openings or your brand out there in front of the people that you're wanting to hire. Because at the end of the day, when we break this all down, if we're talking employee retention, we don't want to retain the dead weight or the people that are toxic to our culture. We want to retain the great people, but in order to do that, we have to find the right people. We want to sell the culture. We want to make sure that when we're out recruiting, that our culture is coming through in all of our different angles of recruiting, whether that be, and we'll talk about these, social media, job boards, career fairs, wherever it is. We want to make sure that we're pushing our culture to the front, so that it's very clear and evident what type of company we are. And when I say what type of company we are, I know that there's at least some roofing companies here joining us. I know that there's a concrete coatings company here joining us. That's not the type of company you are. That's the services you provide. But what type of company? What's it going to be like to work at our company? And then finally, explore all channels. And I'll get into that here in detail in just a minute. So $1 million question, you're saying, yeah, Michael, great. You just told us we need to find the right people. Obviously, that's the case. There's no silver bullet to finding the right people. But there's a lot of little things that you can be doing. But first and foremost, you have to be able to define what the right person is. And I think we all have fallen into this trap. I think back to when I was an entrepreneur and owned my own business, and people would maybe come through my funnel and they'd have a pulse and availability. And I'd say, yeah, you can start on Monday. I didn't have a great definition right away of what the right person was. And as I got further along, I really focused on not just recruiting, but I want to recruit the right person. And I bring this back to the sports analogy of, if you need a quarterback for your football team, you've got to go and recruit a quarterback. And then you take it one step further. If you're a running team, you don't want to necessarily go and recruit a big, slow throwing quarterback. So you have to be very intentional in defining what you want in that right person. The right people aren't just on job boards. I'm not throwing shade at Indeed here. I'm just using Indeed as a very popular job board that you're going to have to recruit in more than just the job boards. You have to be out there. And then the final thing of where the right people are is every single right person is 1, max 2 calls away from a connection. And this goes both ways. So as we start talking about recruiting and interviewing and onboarding, keep this in mind both directions. So your connections you already have, the right people are probably 1 call, max 2 calls away from you. They're there. You just need to leverage some of those connections. But you also have to keep in mind, again, back to this culture thing, that when people are seeing your brand out there, they're probably also 1 or 2 calls away from checking in and saying, hey, how is it to work at Ninja Coatings? So keep that in mind both directions. But the right people are out there. But you got to do a little bit, and we'll talk about that here. Before we get into those channels, a buzzword that was floating around in a lot of my research I was doing was employer brand. And I'd never really sat down and said, okay, what is that employer brand? But it's very obvious when you start breaking it down. But really what it is it's the mission, the goals, the values, that buzzword of culture. what is it like at our business? What do we value? What are our goals? You really need to highlight those goals and the values in all of your job postings, whether they be passive or active job postings. Make sure that you're showing and highlighting what you value as a company and what your goals are. Again, back to those channels, I'm going to get to them on the next slide here, but use all of them. Don't just limit yourself to one source. And then you have to think about your employer brand as more than just a job. One thing that a lot of these companies that I've been working with have a careers page. As I was doing research, a lot of them have really great careers pages. And this quote here is from a Facebook posting from Avco Roofing, good friend of mine, Heath Hicks. I'm just going to read it really quick, but have you always wanted a job where you feel important and cared for? Here at Avco, we take care of our employees. Avco is built on a solid foundation of values that guide our every decision. So I purposely did not say Avco Roofing. I just said Avco, because if you take roofing out of there, that quote, you have zero idea what type of business this is. But as someone needing a job or wanting to change careers, you're speaking to them. You're saying, yeah, I do want a job where I feel important and cared for. I do want a company that's built on solid values. And what's awesome is when you then land on the Avco careers page, there is so much value there that is going to take these questions or statements of, Avco being built on a solid foundation of values. And it's going to really solidify those so that you can say, hey, they're not just saying it. I landed on this career page and it's very apparent that they do believe that.